Officer Grant Spencer begins by recounting a story that has come to define his early days in his new community. With a calm but measured tone, he introduces an incident involving his persistent neighbor, Marissa Anderson. From the very start, it was clear that Marissa had a penchant for testing the limits of common courtesy. Every time Officer Spencer returned home, he found that Marissa's luxury SUV had been parked in a way that obstructed his private entrance. In his narrative, Officer Spencer explains that he had always envisioned a harmonious existence in his new home. He had chosen to move into the serene, gated community of Bayside Grove, California, expecting tranquility and mutual respect among neighbors. However, his optimism was soon dampened by the recurring disruption caused by Marissa. The first time he encountered the problem, it was merely a minor inconvenience, a single day when the grand vehicle blocked the access to his residence. Yet, as days turned into weeks, this misbehavior became a frustrating pattern. Officer Spencer describes his initial reaction to the situation, a mixture of disbelief and annoyance. How could someone so intent on enjoying their own privileges overlook the basic courtesies of parking? Marissa's repeated disregard for the community's parking guidelines was not only inconvenient but also a challenge to the social contract that held Bayside Grove together. As he walked up to his home after a long day on duty, the sight of the gleaming luxury SUV parked in front of his door stirred a sense of indignation within him. The officer's recounting of the episode is detailed and personal. He reflects on how, at first, he attempted to overlook the misstep, assuming it might have been a one-time error. However, the recurrence of the problem forced him to confront the reality. Marissa Anderson was not acting out of mere forgetfulness, but with a blatant disregard for his right to a clear and unobstructed entrance. In his mind, the situation had transformed from a minor neighborhood annoyance into an emblem of disrespect. Throughout the introduction, Officer Spencer's words are chosen with care, underscoring not only the inconvenience of the blocked entrance but also the broader implications of neighborly responsibility. The incident, he explains, is not merely about a car parked in the wrong spot, it is about asserting one's rights and maintaining order in a community where every resident is expected to contribute to a sense of mutual respect. This initial portion of the story sets the stage for what is to come, a detailed chronicle of escalating tensions, multiple confrontations, and the challenges of enforcing community standards in a modern, digitally connected age. Officer Grant Spencer's measured introduction leaves the listener with a clear understanding of the situation's seriousness and the personal impact it has had on his daily life. After moving into the picturesque gated community of Bayside Grove, California, Officer Grant Spencer soon discovered that his dream of a peaceful neighborhood was marred by an unexpected nuisance. Despite the tranquil surroundings and the promise of a respectful environment, one particular neighbor, Marissa Anderson, quickly became the source of ongoing frustration. From the moment he set foot in his new home, Officer Spencer encountered a recurring problem. Marissa's luxury SUV had a habit of parking in a manner that obstructed his private entrance. Officer Spencer recalls his early days in Bayside Grove with a mix of nostalgia and disbelief. He had chosen this community for its reputation of calm and order, envisioning evenings filled with quiet reflection and friendly greetings from neighbors. However, his initial optimism was challenged when he first noticed Marissa's inconsiderate parking habits. It wasn't long before he realized that this was not an isolated incident but rather a recurring pattern that threatened to upset the delicate balance of neighborly courtesy. In the beginning, Officer Spencer attempted to rationalize the behavior. Perhaps, he thought, Marissa was unaware of the inconvenience she was causing, or maybe there was a temporary situation that led to the blocking of his entrance. Yet, as days turned into weeks, it became evident that her actions were anything but accidental. The luxury SUV would appear day after day in precisely the same spot, with no regard for the clearly marked parking guidelines of the community. The officer's frustration grew with each passing day. He began to wonder why someone would choose to consistently ignore such basic rules. For him, the situation wasn't simply about a vehicle parked incorrectly, it was a matter of respect. In a community like Bayside Grove, where every resident was expected to play their part in maintaining a harmonious environment, Marissa's repeated transgressions were an affront to the very spirit of communal living. Officer Spencer describes the mounting irritation he felt each time he was forced to maneuver around the obstructing SUV. Not only did it cause inconvenience, but it also disrupted the flow of his daily routine. He found himself having to adjust his schedule, delaying important errands, and even feeling anxious about returning home to find his access blocked once again. The inconsiderate behavior of Marissa Anderson was slowly eroding the calm that had initially drawn him to Bayside Grove. As he settled into his new community, Officer Spencer was forced to confront the realities of living among individuals who did not always share his values of respect and cooperation. His experience underscored a vital lesson. Even in the most idyllic settings, a single disruptive element could cause ripples that disturbed the entire community's peace. In recounting these initial issues, Officer Spencer sets the stage for a deeper exploration of the challenges that lie ahead. His reflections on those early days in Bayside Grove serve as a reminder of how quickly a dream home can become a battleground for everyday rights and responsibilities. One crisp morning, as Officer Grant Spencer was beginning to settle into his daily routine, he encountered the first direct confrontation with his troublesome neighbor, Marissa Anderson. Determined to address the ongoing issue of her luxury SUV blocking his private entrance, he resolved to speak with her face-to-face in hopes of resolving the matter amicably. Officer Spencer vividly recalls that day, the clear sky, the quiet hum of the neighborhood, and the palpable anticipation of a peaceful resolution. As he approached his front door, he noticed, yet again, the familiar silhouette of the luxury SUV parked directly in front of his home. With a deep breath, he mustered the courage to knock on the door of the residence where Marissa resided. When Marissa opened the door, her expression was nonchalant, bordering on indifferent. Officer Spencer politely, yet firmly, explained that her vehicle was obstructing his private entrance. He made a straightforward request: kindly move the car so that he could access his home without impediment. His tone was measured and respectful, reflecting his genuine desire for a neighborly solution rather than a confrontational showdown. However, Marissa's response was anything but cooperative. Dismissing his request with a wave of her hand and a casual remark, she made it clear that she viewed the situation as trivial. Her nonchalance, coupled with a hint of condescension, left Officer Spencer feeling both frustrated and disrespected. Despite his clear explanation and courteous approach, she chose to ignore his plea, as if the simple act of parking in front of his door was entirely within her rights. The encounter, though brief, left a significant impression on Officer Spencer. In that moment, he realized that Marissa Anderson's disregard for common courtesy was not an isolated occurrence, it was indicative of a deeper pattern of behavior that would continue to challenge the norms of their community. The lack of response to his polite request signified a fundamental disconnect between what was considered acceptable in a cooperative neighborhood and what Marissa was willing to tolerate. For Officer Spencer, this first encounter was a wake-up call. It underscored the importance of addressing issues head-on and not allowing repeated minor inconveniences to fester into major conflicts. He was left with a growing sense of resolve to ensure that his rights as a homeowner would not be trampled by indifference. The event also highlighted for him the challenges of enforcing community rules, especially when faced with someone who dismissed the problem as insignificant. As he walked back to his home that day, Officer Spencer couldn't help but reflect on the nature of neighborly interactions. The incident was more than just a dispute over a parking space, it was a test of mutual respect, responsibility, and the willingness of community members to abide by shared standards. That day marked the beginning of a prolonged struggle to reclaim a sense of order and decency in a neighborhood that had once promised serenity. Officer Grant Spencer's initial polite request to Marissa Anderson soon proved to be only the first ripple in a growing tide of conflict. Over the following weeks, the situation escalated in a way that Officer Spencer could have scarcely anticipated. Each time he returned home, the familiar sight of Marissa's luxury SUV obstructing his private entrance greeted him like an unwelcome reminder of a broken social contract. The repeated disregard for community parking etiquette had grown into a matter of personal frustration, and the stakes were gradually being raised. At first, Officer Spencer attempted to maintain a patient demeanor, assuming that perhaps Marissa was simply unaware of the trouble her actions caused. However, as the incidents multiplied, it became glaringly obvious that her behavior was not a matter of oversight but rather a deliberate act of defiance. On several occasions, not only did she park her vehicle in the obstructive spot, but she also appeared to take pleasure in doing so, often accompanied by a subtle, almost mocking, smile when confronted. This pattern of behavior deeply disturbed Officer Spencer, who prided himself on maintaining order and civility within his community. He found himself in a constant state of tension, the tranquility of Bayside Grove shattered by the repeated intrusion into his daily life. Each blocked entrance was not merely an inconvenience, it was a symbol of disrespect, an affront to his right to a peaceful homecoming after long shifts on duty. Determined to resolve the matter without escalating it into an all-out confrontation, Officer Spencer began exploring alternative avenues for resolution. He approached other neighbors to gauge whether they, too, were experiencing similar disruptions, only to discover that while some had noticed the irregularities, none had been directly affected as he had. The isolation in his struggle only further fueled his resolve to find a lasting solution. He reached out to the management of the gated community, outlining the issue in detail and requesting that they enforce the parking regulations that were meant to guarantee a harmonious living environment for all residents. The community management acknowledged the problem, but their response was measured and cautious. They advised him to continue documenting the incidents, promising to take more decisive action if the pattern persisted. In parallel, Officer Spencer decided to arm himself with undeniable evidence. He started to record each occurrence, taking photos and videos that captured the offending vehicle parked squarely in front of his entrance. With every image, the case against Marissa Anderson grew stronger, and the frustration in his heart was gradually replaced by a determined resolve to stand up for his rights. Yet, for all his efforts to resolve the situation through proper channels, Marissa's actions grew bolder. Not only did she continue to block his entrance, but her demeanor became increasingly provocative. On one particularly exasperating afternoon, when the glare of the setting sun illuminated her vehicle as it occupied his space once again, she even laughed in the face of his protest. That moment marked a turning point for Officer Spencer, a moment when he realized that simple requests for courtesy were no longer enough to rein in such blatant disregard. The deepening dispute now loomed as a microcosm of modern conflicts, where the balance between personal freedom and community responsibility is often skewed by individual entitlement. Officer Spencer found himself questioning how far one person could go before their actions not only infringe upon another's rights but also disrupt the social fabric of an entire community. As the incidents piled up, his frustration steadily transformed into a resolve that could only be described as unwavering. By the end of that tumultuous period, Officer Grant Spencer had reached a point where his patience was exhausted, and he recognized that the escalating problem would require more than a polite conversation. The burden of evidence he had accumulated was not just a record of Marissa Anderson's repeated misdeeds, it was a testament to his commitment to maintaining order and dignity in his own home and in Bayside Grove at large. In that long, trying stretch, the once quiet neighborhood became a battleground for principles, where every act of defiance by one resident threatened to undermine the peace and civility that the community was built upon. Officer Spencer's experience during these weeks would go on to serve as a powerful reminder that even in the most idyllic of settings, the smallest acts of disregard can snowball into conflicts that challenge the very foundation of communal living. His struggle was not just about a blocked entrance. It was about asserting the right to live in an environment where respect and responsibility are non-negotiable. Officer Grant Spencer, now deeply frustrated by the persistent obstruction of his private entrance by Marissa Anderson's luxury SUV, resolved that a more structured solution was needed. The days of polite requests and quiet endurance had given way to a determined quest for a lasting resolution. Realizing that this was not merely a personal inconvenience but a matter that undermined the principles of communal living, he turned to the management of Bayside Grove and even sought legal counsel. Initially, Officer Spencer arranged meetings with the community management team, explaining in detail the recurring problem and presenting the documented evidence he had meticulously gathered. The management, while sympathetic to his plight, reminded him that maintaining harmony in a neighborhood required patience and that everyone was given a chance to amend their behavior. However, as the incidents continued unabated, it became clear that Marissa Anderson's actions were more than a minor infraction, they were a deliberate act of defiance. Concurrently, Officer Spencer consulted with a trusted attorney, seeking clarity on his legal options. Through these consultations, he learned that towing the vehicle could indeed be a legally viable solution if Marissa's actions were deemed to be a violation of community regulations and local parking laws. This revelation marked a turning point in his approach. No longer was the issue simply a matter of neighborly inconvenience, it was now a matter of enforcing the rule of law within his own living space. Empowered by this new legal insight, Officer Spencer began to intensify his efforts to document every instance of obstruction. Every time Marissa's luxury SUV blocked his private entrance, he would take detailed photos and record short video clips, ensuring that there was an indisputable record of the ongoing issue. His thorough documentation not only strengthened his case but also gave him the confidence that his actions were justified and supported by the law. In the midst of these efforts, Officer Spencer reached out to other residents in Bayside Grove, discovering that while many were sympathetic, none had directly experienced the level of disruption he was facing. Yet, this solidarity from the community bolstered his resolve. Neighbors expressed their support for his stance, reinforcing the idea that one person's fight for basic rights was a battle for the integrity of the entire community. During this period, Officer Spencer also learned more about the intricacies of community regulations and the legal framework that governed parking within the gated community. He attended meetings, raised concerns during resident forums, and even proposed enhancements to the community's parking policies to prevent similar issues in the future. His proactive approach not only served to protect his own interests but also set a precedent for the community's commitment to upholding shared standards of conduct. The culmination of these efforts led Officer Spencer to consider towing as the next step. With legal backing and the support of his neighbors, he felt confident that enforcing a tangible consequence for Marissa Anderson's repeated transgressions was both necessary and justified. The decision to call for a tow truck was not made lightly, it represented a final, decisive measure to restore order and ensure that his right to unobstructed access to his home was respected. This phase of the dispute underscored a vital lesson for Officer Spencer, that protecting one's rights sometimes requires a combination of community engagement, legal action, and unwavering determination. His journey through consultations, documentation, and community meetings highlighted the complexities of navigating modern disputes in a world where digital documentation and legal frameworks are indispensable tools for upholding fairness. In the end, Officer Grant Spencer's commitment to resolving the issue became a rallying point for his fellow residents. It served as a reminder that no one should have to endure repeated disrespect and that, through a combination of solidarity and proper legal channels, even the most persistent nuisances can be overcome. Officer Grant Spencer realized that before any further decisive action could be taken, he needed to build an indisputable case against Marissa Anderson. Determined to document every instance of her repeated misdeeds, he embarked on a systematic campaign of evidence gathering. With the precision of someone used to upholding the law, he began recording each time her luxury SUV blocked his private entrance. Armed with a digital camera and a smartphone, Officer Spencer took photos and video recordings of the offending vehicle in all its inconvenient glory. He noted the date, time, and circumstances of each occurrence, ensuring that every detail was meticulously documented. These records were not just casual snapshots, they formed a comprehensive dossier that captured the ongoing nature of Marissa Anderson's disregard for community rules. Every incident added another layer to the growing case. Some days, the SUV was parked in an especially obstructive manner, while on other occasions, the vehicle's presence was accompanied by a palpable air of defiance from Marissa herself, who could sometimes be seen near her car, seemingly unbothered by the disruption she was causing. Officer Spencer made sure to log these moments as well, writing down his observations in a dedicated journal that would later be used as evidence. In addition to personal documentation, Officer Spencer began reporting each incident to the local non-emergency police line. He knew that having an official record would lend additional credibility to his claims and ensure that there was a formal trail of the repeated infractions. With each call, he provided a detailed account of the events, including the impact that the obstructed entrance was having on his daily life and the overall harmony of Bayside Grove. Furthermore, Officer Spencer's careful evidence gathering extended to conversations with other neighbors. While many residents had experienced little more than occasional inconvenience, their testimonies added weight to his claims. Their willingness to share their own observations confirmed that Marissa Anderson's actions were not an isolated issue but part of a broader pattern of behavior that undermined the sense of community. The act of gathering evidence also served a personal purpose for Officer Spencer. It transformed his initial feelings of frustration into a focused determination to protect his rights. The very process of documenting the repeated obstructions became a form of empowerment, a way to reclaim control over a situation that had long disrupted his peace of mind. Each photo, each recorded video, and every official report was a step toward ensuring that the law would ultimately prevail. In the quiet hours of early morning and late evening, Officer Spencer would review his collection of evidence, scrutinizing every detail to build the strongest possible case. He meticulously organized the data, creating folders and logs that detailed the chronology of events. This rigorous approach was not only a demonstration of his commitment to his duty but also an example of how modern technology could be harnessed to resolve disputes that were once relegated to mere anecdotes. By the time the evidence had reached a critical mass, Officer Grant Spencer had constructed a robust case against Marissa Anderson. It was no longer just about a blocked private entrance, it had become a testament to the importance of documentation in a modern society, where even the most persistent acts of disrespect could be countered with clear, undeniable proof. His systematic efforts set the stage for the next phase of his plan, one that would require him to take a definitive step in order to restore order in his home and within the community. Officer Grant Spencer, bolstered by a meticulously compiled dossier of evidence against Marissa Anderson, reached a point where further inaction was simply not an option. The repeated obstruction of his private entrance had escalated from a minor irritation to a flagrant violation of community standards. With the support of documented proof and the quiet backing of his neighbors, he decided to take the final, decisive step. To have Marissa's luxury SUV towed. On a crisp afternoon, with the evidence firmly in hand and his resolve steeled, Officer Spencer contacted a reputable towing service. As he explained the situation, he did so with the clarity and precision expected of a dedicated law enforcement officer. The details were laid out, the date and time of the latest obstruction, the photographic evidence, and even recorded testimonies from fellow residents. It was a moment where personal frustration converged with professional duty. The tow truck arrived promptly, and Officer Spencer supervised the process with a heavy heart. His expectation was not of personal triumph, but of restoring the sanctity of his private entrance and sending a clear message that persistent disregard for community rules would not be tolerated. As the tow truck's equipment engaged with Marissa Anderson's vehicle, a hush fell over the surrounding area. Neighbors, who had gathered at a respectful distance, watched in stunned silence as the SUV was hooked and slowly towed away. For Marissa, the situation took a dramatic turn. Witnesses later reported that she reacted with vehement anger, her face contorted into an expression of disbelief and fury. Some even claimed that she shouted obscenities, while others noted that her gestures bordered on threats of legal action. Officer Spencer, while maintaining a professional demeanor, could not help but feel a profound sense of regret that the situation had escalated to this point. Yet, he remained resolute in his decision, understanding that enforcing the law was essential to safeguarding his rights and those of his neighbors. In the aftermath of the tow, Officer Spencer's actions reverberated through Bayside Grove. The incident sparked conversations among residents, many of whom expressed their support for his efforts to maintain order and uphold community standards. While some viewed the towing as a drastic measure, the overwhelming sentiment was one of relief that someone had finally taken a stand against repeated disrespect. For Officer Grant Spencer, that day marked a significant turning point in his personal and professional life. It was a moment when careful documentation, legal knowledge, and a steadfast commitment to community values converged into an act of necessary intervention. Although the incident left him with a lingering sadness over the breakdown of neighborly relations, he remained convinced that enforcing the rules was the only way to preserve the quality of life in Bayside Grove. His actions during that decisive moment would be remembered as both a personal victory and a clarion call to the community, that respect for one's property and adherence to established guidelines were paramount. It was an unyielding stand against a culture of entitlement, one that underscored the importance of accountability in even the smallest matters. Despite the towing and the clear message it sent, it was not long before Officer Grant Spencer found himself facing the same challenge once more. Within a week, Marissa Anderson's luxury SUV reappeared, parked squarely in front of his private entrance as if mocking the previous intervention. Determined not to let history repeat itself, Officer Spencer acted swiftly once again. Armed with his camera and a resolve hardened by the earlier incident, he documented the new violation in meticulous detail. The familiar scene, now recorded on video, captured not only the obstructing vehicle but also the unmistakable air of defiance in the way it was positioned. This recurrence confirmed what Officer Spencer had feared: Marissa Anderson had not learned from the previous episode, and her disregard for community standards persisted unabated. Without hesitation, Officer Spencer contacted the towing service for a second time. This decision, while weighing heavily on him, was essential to reassert the community's right to orderly conduct. As the tow truck arrived and began the process of removing the offending vehicle, neighbors once again gathered, their expressions a mix of frustration and cautious optimism. They hoped that this time, the repeated offense would finally serve as a final warning. Marissa's reaction, as captured on the recording, was one of explosive anger. Her furious outburst, coupled with gestures that signaled her determination to defy the rules, was undeniable proof of the unresolved conflict. Yet for Officer Spencer, the documentation of her behavior was a testament to the necessity of enforcing the law, no matter how personal the dispute had become. The second tow marked another chapter in the ongoing struggle for respect and order in Bayside Grove. For Officer Grant Spencer, it was a reaffirmation that standing up for one's rights sometimes requires repeating actions that are difficult but ultimately necessary. The recurrence of the violation only strengthened his resolve to ensure that his private entrance, and by extension, the community's standards, remained inviolate. In the wake of the second tow, a noticeable change began to ripple through Bayside Grove. The repeated removal of Marissa Anderson's luxury SUV had finally made its impact felt. Neighbors who had once watched the unfolding drama with apprehension now expressed support for Officer Grant Spencer's steadfast actions. The atmosphere in the community shifted as many residents recognized the importance of upholding the agreed-upon standards that kept their neighborhood functioning harmoniously. Officer Spencer, while still processing the emotional toll of the prolonged conflict, found solace in the solidarity of his fellow residents. The incident, once a solitary battle against inconsideration, had become a collective stand against persistent disrespect. In quiet conversations and community gatherings, people expressed their appreciation for his determination to reclaim his private entrance, a right they all shared. For Officer Grant Spencer, the resolution was not merely about a tow truck or a blocked driveway, it was about restoring a sense of order and mutual respect in Bayside Grove. As the dust began to settle, he took a moment to reflect on the entire ordeal, from the first intrusive parking incident to the final act of enforcement. His introspection revealed a profound lesson, that standing up for one's rights, supported by clear evidence and community backing, was essential in maintaining both personal dignity and the collective well-being of the neighborhood. With Marissa Anderson's repeated offenses finally curtailed, Officer Spencer could once again experience the simple pleasure of an unobstructed homecoming. The return of peace to his private entrance signified a small yet significant victory, a victory for the entire community. In the final chapter of this prolonged dispute, Officer Grant Spencer shared his concluding reflections on the events that had upended his once peaceful life in Bayside Grove. With the matter now resolved and the obstruction permanently eliminated from his private entrance, he took time to ponder the broader implications of his experience. Officer Spencer emphasized that his journey was not simply about a single act of neighborly defiance, it was a lesson in understanding and asserting one's rights in a modern community. He spoke about the importance of documentation, which had played a critical role in providing undeniable evidence of repeated infractions. This record, he explained, was a powerful tool in the fight against entitlement and disregard for community rules. Furthermore, he reflected on the role of community support. The solidarity shown by his neighbors had been a beacon of encouragement during a time when it might have been easier to simply accept the daily inconvenience. Their shared sense of justice reaffirmed his belief that the strength of a community lies in its ability to uphold standards together. Officer Grant Spencer also stressed the significance of knowing your rights, both as a homeowner and as a member of a community. He encouraged others to stand up for what is right, to document any wrongdoing, and to approach conflicts not with anger, but with a clear plan of action based on facts and legal understanding. His message was one of empowerment, a call for residents everywhere to protect their personal space and the values that bind them together. In his final thoughts, Officer Spencer expressed hope that his experience would serve as a lesson for all. He acknowledged that while conflicts might arise in even the most idyllic neighborhoods, they could be resolved through a combination of determination, documentation, and mutual respect. With his private entrance finally clear, he looked forward to returning to the simple routines of everyday life, routines unmarred by the tension of past disputes. As he closed this chapter, Officer Grant Spencer's parting words resonated with the entire community, a reminder that every resident has the right to peaceful living, and that no one should be made to feel powerless in defending that right. His story, now a part of Bayside Grove's lore, stands as a testament to the importance of upholding order, respecting one another's space, and always knowing your rights.